Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Spiritual as Fuck or Whatever podcast. I'm Roxanne McDonald.
And I'm Joe Clements.
Each week, we explore topics related to spirituality, mindfulness, personal development, and recovery.
This week, we're going to talk about
spirituality. How does that work? I wanted to do this topic right up front because it's in our name and because I feel like it's misunderstood and it could mean so many things. And dude, your keys before we start filming.
Well, this is real time, so my flare needs to come off. I don't need my flare.
Yeah, so I thought it would be good for us just to get out, like, what do we think spirituality is, to just engage in that conversation. And then if there's stuff that we think spirituality isn't, yeah, so I'm going to let you lead, Joe. I loved, like, we've been talking about this a lot, and I really loved what you had to say. Yeah. And then I'll jump in a little bit. So spirituality, what is it, Joe?
It's a hard word to say for me. Spirituality. Spirituality. I don't know what spirituality is.
Okay, podcast is over.
Yeah, so boom, check in to that. So spirituality for me, it was something that I had to investigate, because I have this, even with mindfulness and the meditation stuff, I was just like this punker Santa Cruz skateboarder kid was like, fuck all that hippie shit, you know? So it's like, that's still coming into, even after my life being changed from mindfulness. I think my relationship to my life, not my life totally changed, but it did change in the long run. Anyway, I digress. I still have had this vision of spirituality, of, you know, some of it being, you know, incense flowing dresses and tree hugging and whatever, you know, and a lot of spiritual is like believing in a God or something. So it was like, it was really hard for me to wrap my mind around spirituality. But I love the topic because it got me thinking, like, what is spirituality? And I think we both kind of agreed on, and what I came to was, in myself, was it's connection. It's a connection to myself. You know, with mindfulness, and I'm not a scientist by any means, but
you certainly look like a scientist.
Yeah, I'm totally. Well, I got the glasses for it. But mindfulness in these resources that we're doing, it's helping us get in contact with our right hemisphere of our brain, which is lost somewhere around 5, where the left brain starts taking over, and it's more the analytical, where the right brain is, you know, babies, infants, it's just connection. All it is you're just connected, nothing's separate, you know, you're just that's how you're navigating. But then throughout life, conditions, and, you know, there's separateness. There's I, me, and mine. There's you, yours, and, you know. So with mindfulness, it's gotten me in contact back with what's going on here with myself, and then connected me with others, and with nature, and hugging trees, and liking incense, and all that kind of stuff. And it's nothing wrong with it. So it's being connected to everything and everyone, you know. And how I mean by that is not like in this, like, oh, we're all like the same, we're all equal, because that's definitely not the case. Mm-hmm. You know, in, you know, dynamics, but that in relationship, how I navigate through my life affects others. So in that connection, so is through mindfulness, through meditation, the more I'm in connection with every kind of emotion, every thought, not taking it so personal, I'm more connected with who I am. So then I'm navigating through life, not creating a toxic ripple, if you will, and not hating every part of my life that was so fucked up. You know, there's a lot of fucked up shit in my life, but I think spirituality is taking that fucked up shit and the alchemy of it to making it a powerful message. Part of my message, part of not who I am necessarily, but how I relate. The alchemy of that turning those fucked up situations in my life into gold, into not that defines me, but refines me. It's like, yeah, the refines, like, it's part of the story. So I think that's spirituality, is not hating.
Do you believe in God?
No. Mm-mm. I don't believe in an all-powerful, like, overseer Lord kind of thing. We can get into semantics of, God just means, our connection with each other, whatever. No, God means to me somebody in the sky overseeing everything, and that's not what I truly believe. I do believe in a interconnectedness for sure.
Do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
Now, yes, but not in the lens of that what I was talking about in the beginning, of just I'm just being spiritual and like super like dismissive kind of thing. I see spirituality can be kind of dismissive of not being engaged, and I think spirituality is actually being engaged what's going on here, and pointing to my heart to myself, and that keeps me engaged with others, and with the discomforts of life, and turning all the discomforts into learning and the alchemy. I really like that with it. There's no, my son says it, and it's like, he pisses me off when he says it though. Like, I'll make mistakes, and I'm quick. I really try to apologize with them. Like, okay, that was unskillful, and he said at one time, he goes, it's not a mistake, Dad, unless you don't learn from it. I'm like, holy shit, and that's spirituality. It's learning from all our fumbling around, and I feel. Yeah. What's spirituality to you, Roxanne?
Well, I'm like certifiably spiritual as fuck. I have
You have the check mark or what?
No, I'm not. I could. I applied for the check mark on Instagram and I actually thought how interesting that would be to be like, or people. So I have this Instagram account, spiritual_AF. We'll talk about that later. But people will recognize me out in public, but they'll say, "Oh, are you spiritual as fuck?" And I'm like, kind of, but not really.
Right.
I think the way I named that page was from this like pushback of like spiritual bullying, and the word spiritual was difficult for me because of a similar thing of that to be spiritual, it meant that I was signing up for a bunch of personality stuff,
right?
And which meant, what do spiritual people do? They wear certain clothes. Right. They speak in a certain soft way. They don't get mad. Voice. Yeah. They, there's all this stuff. Yeah. And so to identify as spiritual for me was like, and I have had this experience of, I have been a seeker of spirituality and connection and the sacred and one like curiosity about how the universe fucking works underground for years and years. Like I was practicing meditation and since I was a teenager and praying daily and going and trying things on, but really did not want to talk about it. Like I didn't go and put I don't think I've ever really had a spiritual fashion era because I just didn't want, it just felt wrong to me. Yeah. And so, having my experience with finding a power greater than myself was a difficult experience. And so for me, when I got sober really young, and I was really mad about my childhood. I come from intense trauma and like all the forms of trauma. And so when people would say, well, there's a God that's not going to let bad things happen to you. And I was like, well, where was that God? Where was that God when all this really bad stuff was happening to me? And it wasn't about I did good, so therefore God liked me. It was like before I had any kind of power in the world,
Yeah.
really horrific stuff was happening.
Yeah.
And so I had a hard time where I was like, well, if there is some sort of balance in the universe or some like loving being, then it doesn't like me very much.
Right.
So
was your God Santa Claus? Because I felt like mine was at times.
Yeah.
And I was definitely
I
on
didn't
the,
have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I had though, so I feel I'm really lucky in that I didn't have religious training growing up. My brothers and I would do this thing. I was such a little manipulator scamp. I figured out that Bible schools during the summer would come to your house and pick you up and play games with you and give you food and then drive you home.
Sounds like a great deal.
So I just went through the phone book and called them all.
By
and was
yourself?
just
That's
and I was
super
like
cool.
7 and it was with my brothers and we were just like, yeah, let's do this.
Hell yeah.
And so I called them all, and sometimes like 3 like station wagons would show up at the same times, and my brothers and I would just split up and go to different churches.
Checking it out.
And it'd be like, I mean, I like.
Would you report at the end?
Yeah,
What was the
or it would
best
be
one?
like
Where do we go
they
next
had
week?
candy, and then it'd be like these guys, they gave us salad, you know.
Do not go there.
Yeah, like the Catholics had not the good food, but they had really good crafts. Like they always they let you like
they
paint
like
the paint.
they like the visual stuff.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
that the Baptists like sang the best songs and had my family's like comes from, I don't want to get into that, but anyways, there's a Baptist thing, a Southern Baptist thing. So I think that was the one that we all really liked because the food was really good and they sang a lot. But I didn't get harmed by church or spirituality or anything. And I know so many people who are coming from that. So what I had was this like distance from religion, and like even the spiritual hippies in town, they were the ones who were feeding me. They were the ones, so, but I just was distanced from it. But what I had when I was searching for some sort of support about healing is really, I just was like, I need something. And I was being told, if you want a life, you have to find some sort of spiritual relationship. Right. And so I was told children have an experience of spirit usually, and that usually can inform you about what yours is. And so mine, I'm going to tell my story. Like,
you do it.
So when I went looking for a higher power, I thought of this experience I had. So I have to backtrack and say that my grandma had a lacquered piece of driftwood with a clock on it and a hologram picture of Jesus in front of her recliner in her trailer. And as you walked by, so Jesus was on the cross, and that with it, his arms out and the crown of thorns and like the wavy brown hair and the close cropped beard and like beautiful eyes, and he's gorgeous, right? And as you walk by, he would you look at and he would raise his head and drop his head, right? And I would just stand there and be like, and like make him do it. My grandma would be like smoking cigarettes, and she'd be like, don't fuck with baby Jesus, he helps me with my word puzzles. And
don't fuck with the word puzzles. Grandma. Damn, yeah.
And so she told me about this character Jesus, and she said that he loved everybody and everybody loved him. That he was God in human form, and that he had suffered for every single one of us. And so then my mom, so I was like, cool, on. Yeah. So then my mom gets this new boyfriend named Clutch Cargo that she met off the CB radio.
His name was not Clutch Cargo.
His name was Clutch Cargo.
His name was not Clutch Cargo.
Yes. And so Clutch takes us to the Santa Cruz County Fair to see a country western show.
Okay.
And so I am up on Clutch Cargo's shoulders, and we're in front, like right in front of the stage where the stairs come down. And so I have my hands up in this chain link fence, and I just remember it like as if it were yesterday. And then Willie Nelson comes on the stage, and he's got this wavy brown hair, close crop beard.
Oh, I see where you're going. Okay.
And everybody was like, "We love you," and he's like, "I love you," and then he like sings. And it's that voice that it's like that dude has suffered, heart, and so I watched Willie Nelson with the experience of being in the presence of the Savior, and I was 5 years old, and I had
a spiritual experience.
I mean, it was, but listen, so then so then I'm like the entire time just like in the presence of the Lord, slain with the Spirit. you know, and it was real. And I can't, you know, you can't quite explain that, but it was just, I had absolute attention on this, and I felt love. I felt love going out of myself and love coming into myself. And then Willie comes down off the stage, and he's like right in front of me, and I just like scream, I love you. And he stops and he reaches up and he touches my hand. And he said, I love you too, baby. Wow. And it was so perfect. And so then when I went to go look for a higher power, I went to that moment and that beauty of that connection of like just this cracking open. And so what I thought was, if I had smarted myself out of that, I would have robbed myself. Absolutely. And so if I had been old enough to say to myself, this is not a spiritual experience, because that is just a country western singer who's high on weed and bankrupt, and he cannot be a representation of what is divine in the world, I would have robbed myself of a real experience. And so when I went looking for a higher power, I went like, it's the act of cracking open. It's the willful opening myself up to something that is sweeter than what my brain will give me. It's something more connected, and it is love. And it's loving. And so I called it the willingness. Do I have the willingness? Do I have the willingness? And so when I think like the bottom line for me about spirituality is that, do I close down towards my life and myself and the world and other people, or do I crack open? And that's the baseline. And for me, like with the idea about, well, what does spiritual mean, or being spiritual, it's like my beliefs affect me. And that is scientifically proven. What we think affects what we do and how we are, and like all the like biochemically, but having curiosity and consciousness about what I do with my thoughts, what I do with my actions, how I engage in the world, you know, and have that, for me, just that consciousness and curiosity is what spirituality is for me.
Beautiful. It was so cool. I had a similar experience.
You did?
Yeah. But it was with...
Was it Willie?
No, it was Ronnie James Dio. At the Santa Cruz. It was at the Santa Cruz.
Holy diver!
Yeah,
You've
for
been
sure.
down too
I was
long
high
in the
as
midnight
fuck, and I was scared shitless because he came out and he was about... I mean,
he's a wee.
He's like 3 feet tall. Or he was, yeah. But yeah, that's intense, and I love that it was. There's a couple things that just like out of what you shared is that the childlike just openness, that's what it was. And if you're any older, that's just we'll poo-poo on that whole thing. Like, nope, that's not what it was. But there was a genuine, whether it was the willingness. You know, and it is that's can your heart be open? I love that. That's super cool.
Well, and I think when we talk about spirituality, we both spoke to like what we think, you know, the external idea about spirituality, and then for me, with owning it on my Instagram used to have a different name, but I was getting bullied about like the vibe of my page was about, you know, we were posting spiritual quotes. We were posting things about recovery and substance abuse recovery and like thoughts on it. And then people would be like, I would post something about like a poop joke or like something raunchy or something, whatever. And that people would be like, well, how can you call yourself spiritual and do that? How could you do that? Well, that's not very spiritual of you. Yeah. And I finally just was like, I'm just going to name it spiritual as fuck. Because I was like, the thing that I think for me, and the reason why, I mean, we talked about in our first podcast about why.
Check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Well, about why this podcast is to honor that there's so many things in my life that are just as spiritual as sitting on a cushion or doing yoga or chanting or my prayers in the morning. Absolutely. And so that engagement with that, like, meaning, you know, like we're meaning making machines. Humans are.
Did you ever find yourself like getting into spirituality, even I guess maybe a path for you? Were you like finding yourself it had to be one way or the other kind of thing? I had to be a certain way?
Yeah, I shamed myself about it.
Yeah, I felt the same kind of thing getting into meditation, Buddhist meditation. It was like the same thing. I was like, I had to speak in a soft voice, and I had to be a certain, I had to look in your eyes a certain amount of time, you know, and it's like, it wasn't authentic.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't authentic. And then I was like, I'm not really, I'm not doing this right. You know, there was that kind of thing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so. Yeah, and that's what I like about Buddhism, is that it's like, it's turning towards the suffering. You know, it's not like bypassing. It's not going anywhere. It's being with all these difficulties that they say. You know, the teaching is dukkha, which basically I like.
Sounds like poo-poo.
That's what I like about it, right? Because dukkha is translated as suffering, and you can be like, oh, the suffering. There's tons of suffering in life, but it's not about that. It's about dukkha. It's about the shit moments. Like, fuck. You know, that relationship to the fuck, you know, and not going down that spiral, and even being pissed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we'll probably talk about later about what it wasn't okay for me to be angry. I'm a Buddhist, don't you know? I go into rehabs and teach meditation, you know. I'm not supposed to be angry. No, hell, I get fucking angry. I threw a dishpan the other day. No one got hurt. But, you know what I mean? So there's that kind of stuff, but it was like the shame that goes around. But yeah, like, everything's spiritual if you're connected to it, if you're connected to the why or the what is I feel the connection to it. Even we were talking about nicotine. You know, nicotine, like, sometimes it's fucking hectic, and like, we're going through life, and you know, there's a little something that we need to, what is our relationship to it, what is our pull to it, what you know, that kind of thing. Anything, drugs and alcohol, anything. If there's an underlying, I think that's the spiritual piece of what's the underlying, what is the force that is driving, and can you open your heart to that? Can you open your heart to the wounds? You know.
But what do you think about? Because a lot of times I feel like I get misjudged by saying I'm spiritual as somebody who is going to justify ridiculous or negative behavior through the idea of spirituality, or that I'm going to be somebody who bypasses my feelings, bypasses the reality of the world. And I think we're definitely going to do an entire show on spiritual bypassing. But what do you think? Like, when I think just going through the world, being somebody who's openly spiritual. Like, what do you think about like that judgment, or just about our judgment? Because I mean, throughout this, I think both of us have judged like people who wear, spiritual clothing. I've outright been like, this, like, if you wear that. And so I face that, like, where I'm like, I want to be other than you.
Well, that's the thing. And it's like, we're othering. And it's like we're separating ourselves. And I feel like that's like, even when I, coming from the recovery background as well, is like just faking it till I made it kind of thing. But it was always a connection. And I remember like even saying, okay, when I'm in like this delusional self, even drugs and alcohol and everything, it cuts me off from the connection, because I'm so about what's in front of me and how I'm being perceived, rather than just connecting, and so how other people perceive. It's interesting, like, because again, I'll go into like these places where I work, and they I don't think they said Spiritual Joe, but they call me like the meditation guy or some like, and they're like, oh, you're so this or that. And it's like, man, if you really knew me, because what's happening when I'm sitting in front of a group is I'm connecting to the wounds and the suffering of each person in there, and the hopes and the stuff that they're coming awake to. So there's a connection. And that's spirituality to me. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but the judgment piece for me, I'm still coming into my own, what I really understand about spirituality, because I really don't even like using that word, because it still has a connotation. Thank you for helping me with my words. But it has this like stigma, and it's like, I don't want to be that guy, but I am so that guy, You know, like I said, in the flutes and the incense and the hugging trees, it's like I will hug a tree in a minute now. And I love it. Like I've been on retreats. Like I'll do a 7-day silent meditation retreat, and by the end, I'm just like putting my hand on a tree and just feeling that like there's a resource. It's like, damn, there's some kind of connection when I can just get the fuck out of the way, get the judgment out of the way of whatever. It's like I can feel completely connected to everything, you know. But,
yeah. Well, I vacillate. So I vacillate between, because I think one of the things that bugs me about the idea of a spiritual personality is that if you're spiritual, then you no longer use discernment. That if you're not being judgmental, if you're not being judgmental or you're connecting with everything, then you're no longer discerning.
Yeah.
Like these are behavior patterns of people who blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to engage because that doesn't, or to just check in with myself. Because a lot of times we'll talk about this, about my reticence to do a lot of like, you know, eye gazing and chanting practice stuff because I'm like, I just know my gut. Right.
Yeah. It's not
and so
for
that
you.
discernment and just I am somebody who has a high level of discernment and honoring that as well as now. I used to be just down to my spirituality was that do I crack open or do I harden? And my spirituality is that I believe that praying works.
Sure.
That was it. That was it. That was what I was willing to do. And now I am, you know, half the time I am like a full-blown witch who I light candles. I talk to the moon. I've got like shit going on where I like write down my intentions. I do all this, you know, manifesting and and I do, you know, work with soul retrieval and healing my ancestors and, you know, like big weird shit.
Stuff that you never did.
No.
And like, that you'd poo-poo on that.
Definitely am. I mean, even just saying that aloud right now to just be like, I did a fire ceremony a couple days ago with my shaman, you know, and I'm like, oh, I don't want people to know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But how was that for you?
I mean, I did it in a way, I did it with somebody I trust 100%. Yeah. And I don't necessarily, for me, I was like, I don't need to buy into all of it to get the benefit from it. Right. And what I wanted was the benefit of it. Right. I wanted to feel like my home was protected. So sure. I did physical actions to express my internal desires. And it doesn't mean that then I am now somebody who goes out into the world and that is my entire identity. Yeah,
it doesn't have to be so black. There's so many nuances in it.
Yeah.
And I love the discernment part. Knowing when to lean into something and when to like, nope, not. And that's like, all the different kind of modalities that we do that to find freedom. And that's just unpacking this of like what spirituality is even to me is like, it is trying things that I'm like, hell no, I'm not going to do some authentic movement shit. You know what I mean? Because
I did it.
And it's like, I sat there and I'm like, how free do I want to be? You know, do I want to sit here and that's the judgment. The judgment was keeping me separate. And there's no benefit. There's like, you know, so I fucking moved my hand a certain way and I'm like, oh, okay. And, you know, and tried it. And is it something that I'd do again? I don't know. Maybe, but was I a little bit free from doing it? Yeah, for sure. And I think it was just because I did something I leaned into something that was uncomfortable. And I feel like that's spirituality, even uncomfortable conversations around race, around gender, any of those kind of things that I can feel clunky around being a cis white male, you know, like I can feel uncomfortable around that, you know, because I've been so safe. But if I'm uncomfortable, I want to be engaged in that. I want to be engaged, you know, that's a whole nother topic, but all those kind of things where the modalities, the fire sermon stuff. I love that. I'm so stoked that you did that. I love that kind of stuff. You know, I really do. I do. I love Palo Santo. Only the ones that are ethically. Yeah, seriously. And looking into that kind of stuff too. What's our impact? You know, so that's staying engaged, you know, not just like a spiritual bypass. It's like, I got sage and Palo Santo. It's like, yeah, where'd you get that Palo Santo? You know? That kind of stuff. Staying, you know, engaged.
I think we should do a whole show on that.
Absolutely. You know, and that's the kind of stuff, like, it's not just like, oh, I'm spiritual because I have these Birkenstocks and this outfit, and I'm just, whatever I do on the weekends. I go to one meditation group. It's like, how are we, and you talk about it too, and like how, like, we even got together, is like we both recognize that we've been doing the work. And that's what it is putting in the work to be free internally and externally to, and share this message. So, yeah.
Good. Well, do you have our hope is that we're going to be giving, like, with topics, just like tangible takeaways, any kind of tools. And I think in the beginning we're just kind of introducing ourselves. So, but I have a little bit of a takeaway, like a little tool.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
You show me yours and I'll show you mine.
If anything, is just keep questioning, and if it's uncomfortable, if it's, let me rephrase that. If you're safe enough to explore, there's safety is a huge thing. A container, if you feel safe enough, if it's uncomfortable, question why, what's going on, what is the discomfort, what is keeping me separate from, and what I mean by uncomfortable, if anything that there's judgment around it, question it, question everything, question even spirituality, question anything that we're saying, question everything and find out for yourself. And I think once we start doing that, we know what's really wise in ourselves, rather than just doing something because we saw a meme for it or whatever, or not like something because we saw a meme for it, because usually when I don't like something, it's because
of a meme. Are you fucking judging memes?
Never. I would never do that. None of yours, none of the spiritual AF. But you know what I mean, though? Just question any of that kind of stuff. If there's a discomfort, like, okay, how can I soften around that? So I think that's, investigate and question.
Yeah, good. Mine is just about honoring, like, whatever it is that you already are doing that brings you some peace. And hopefully when you're doing the questioning, you're going to start seeing, like, oh, is this bringing me peace? Or, like, whatever. I have done things where I'm going to specifically say I have struggled with depression and depressive thoughts, and I found that watching babies laughing in the morning helped me get out of bed, helped me go to work, and helped me do these things. And I would be like, oh, I'm wasting time by watching these fucking videos. And then when I shifted to just go, this is a meditation. Me watching that babies laughing until I'm laughing is sacred. Because it is me consciously bringing in something that is going to positively affect me. And then therefore I go out into the world and I'm kinder to other people. And so just whatever it is that maybe that you're doing already, that could be a meditation, that could be just to honor what you do naturally, and just, is there a way to go, is this about connection, is this about cracking open, is this about love, could this be seen as some way of being present with something more than my ego and my thoughts? And that is spiritual. That's spiritual as fuck, is what in my book.
The discernment, and I hear that a lot of what is judgment and what is just like, no, that's just not for me. Like there's a fine line of knowing that, So, but I think it is investigating that. Cool.
Great. It seems like we're wrapping up. So if you liked this podcast and you think you know somebody who would benefit from just this talk about spirituality, please share it with them. Also, if you screenshot this podcast episode and put it on your Instagram or Facebook page and tag me, spiritual_AF, I will repost it and thank you.
Get with that.
And then and then where can you find us? So I just said spiritual_AF. You can also find Joe at
_Joe.Clements_. And
these are both on Instagram. And then also, if you'd like to send us a message, you can email us at spiritualaf or whatever @gmail.com.
Yep.
All right.
And then do we need to plug or our address for the podcast, or they already know because they're here?
Yeah, you're here.
You're here. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
You found
we'll
us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yay.
Now find yourself.
Oh, that was so good.
Yeah. See how I
Okay,
did
goodbye.
that? Later.